Welcome to Grade.com Talks With. Today we're talking with Chris Coxon, Vice President of Communications at Heifer International, an organization whose goal is to help families achieve living incomes, which will allow them to feed their families daily, educate all their children, and have proper housing, water, hygiene, and other essential resources. And if you're new to our podcast, please press subscribe button either on YouTube or your podcast app, because today we're going to learn about an organization that has helped more than 36 million families lift themselves out of hunger and poverty. Hello, Chris. Welcome to Grade.com Talks. We're excited to have you here.
Likewise, Karen. Thanks very much for having me.
Wonderful. Could you please describe Heifer International for someone who is not familiar with your work?
Sure. So Heifer International is an international development organization, and we're on a mission to end global hunger and poverty in a sustainable way. So we work with predominantly with farmers, local farmers, small scale farmers, and food producers in 21 countries around the world, supporting them to tackle issues like food insecurity in their communities, and building sustainable food and farming businesses. We have a focus on two different levels. When we talk about sustainability in two forms: so economic sustainability and environmental sustainability. Because obviously we recognize that if you have a business that's doing well, you need the environmental element of it, particularly with farming, to be able to sustain your business. So our goal as an organization is to support the communities that we work with to reach what we call a living income. So you may have heard, particularly within the space of hunger and poverty, organizations talk about this international poverty line. And it's kind of a weird process that comes to it, but it's a number that's produced by the World Bank of $1.90 a day that a community, someone needs around the world to live above this poverty line. But as you know, and I know from where we're both located right now, if we go around the corner and buy a loaf of bread, it's going to cost a different amount of money. Same thing for housing, et cetera, et cetera. So a living income is, simply put, is the international poverty line is basically looking at shelter, food, and clothing. It doesn't look at that whether the quality of that food. So as you and I both know, that you can eat something that fills your stomach, but if it's not good quality food, then your health will be impacted, and you'll probably be hungry very quickly afterwards if it's full of sugar or something like that. So we focus on kind of good quality food, obviously shelter and clothing as well, but importantly also healthcare and education. So the work that we're doing is we're supporting these businesses to reach this living income level and above, because that's an amount of money that will cover the household's total costs in a sustainable way for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ending hunger and poverty has been one of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and previously it was Millennium Development Goals. And the issue has been around for so long, and the fact that it remains still an issue is a ring for us to keep working on the direction, and seeing that organizations such as yours is working in direction, but not only in economic perspective way, but also in ecological sustainable way. So there you're finding a mix of two key areas and making sure the solutions that you are building together with farmers across the world for them to achieve living income is sustainable, both in terms of economics as well as ecologics. So it's great to see that. Heifer believes that ending poverty begins with agriculture, and therefore one of your key areas of focus is economic development. Could you please tell us why ending hunger begins with agriculture, and how your work in economic development is addressing this issue?
Yeah, so simply put, agriculture produces the food that we eat, right? So if you're working on issues of hunger and poverty, that's an important thing to take into account. But I think if you look more widely, that particularly in developing countries, that agriculture is often one of, if not the highest source of livelihood for people. So a lot of people work in the agriculture space or reliant on agriculture for their food. And I think what a lot of people don't recognize, particularly if you live in somewhere like the US or in Europe, but the majority of the food that's actually produced worldwide is produced by smallholder farmers. So people that are working on a small scale, maybe with a couple of acres of land, and they're doing so in a way. And this is, I think, important for the environmentally sustainable side of things, is that they're doing so in a way that rotates crops. It has a blend of different crops on their land. And that's really important for that environmental sustainability, because ultimately, if you grow the same thing over and over again, the nutrients in the soil get saturated, meaning that you likely need chemicals to keep whatever you're growing, right? And that obviously has kind of detrimental impacts not only on the soil quality but water, pollution, etc., etc. So more widely. As I said, agriculture is a huge source of employment already, but we also see that there's massive potential because a lot of the farmers that we work with, I'll give you some examples. So we work directly at the farm level, so one-to-one direct with farmers, but also with farmer organizations on big scale, and kind of working with government and other partners. So where our organization is most known is that you can give the gift of an animal or seeds or something else to a family around the world. But when you provide, say, if you wanted to give a cow to a community in Uganda, there's no point giving that cow if the people that are receiving the cow don't know how to look after the cow, right? So we provide a whole package of training for farmers. We also encourage them to join cooperatives, and we actually help to set up cooperatives as well. Cooperatives are really important as farmers move from producing just enough milk, for example, to feed their family, to actually realizing that their farm can not only provide food for their family, but provide milk and other produce that they can sell in markets and gain a reliable source of income. And reason that cooperatives are really important is that if you think about it, if you're one person who runs your farm, you're the kind of the production person, you're the sales person, you're the packaging person, etc., etc. And what cooperatives can really help is that they can provide a series of different services that farmers can access. So they can help farmers access credit, for example. If you think about it, if you're a farmer that's growing, say you're growing vegetables, your vegetables, you can't sell a vegetable every day necessarily. Your vegetables will come at harvest time. And so you need money to be able to keep your business going, to be able to buy the seeds, the fertilizer, etc. And then, you pay that money back when you harvest your crops and you sell your crops. And so financial services is really important, but also things like when you're talking about livestock, feed and other important materials. If you can buy a container of feed and sell that to the members of the cooperative, then the price that you can offer is far better than if one person goes to the market and buys a bag of feed. So there are, kind of economies of scale that can be gained there as well. But I think the important thing as well is the flip side of it, in that when you start producing great products, a cooperative can help you to find the markets or connect you to the markets to be able to sell that product. So that system is really important. And then I think the other piece that is noteworthy in the way that we work, and that's really important in terms of building strong and sustainable agricultural economies, is that kind of infrastructure side of things. So I've touched on that a little bit with cooperatives, but for example, if you're a milk producer, you milk your cows twice a day, you take that milk to market. But if someone doesn't come up to you and say in the market, I want to buy milk, then your milk's going to go bad. One of the things that we've done is we've invested across East Africa in a series of different milk hubs. So you as the farmer, you can milk your cow twice a day. You take your milk when you've finished the milking, you take it to a local hub, and the milk will get tested to make sure it's good, and then it will get chilled, and then it will get put into a big cooling tank, and then it will get sold directly to one of the continent's biggest dairies. And by selling in bulk, it means that farmers can get a much more reliable income because they can have access to a regular market, if that makes sense. They're not at the whim of whether someone wants their product every day when they go to a market stall and having to spend the time to actually sell the product in the market. So we believe there's a lot more, kind of potential from agriculture. I mean, particularly in developing countries around the world. As I said, a lot of people are already employed in it, but there's also much more potential because you're probably aware that farming is undergoing a big transformation and needs to undergo a big transformation in the years ahead to continue feeding the world and doing so in a way that not only protects the environment but ultimately cools the planet.
Absolutely. For many developing and underdeveloped countries, farming and agriculture is the main industry that their economy thrives upon. And once people are able to utilize the land that they have, they can feed their family, and that's a first step toward getting out of the hunger. But once there's enough crop, there's enough livestock that is in excess of what family can consume, then they can go and sell it and make additional income. And the help of your organization coming here and training farmers on financial education, as well as the agriculture education, and connecting them to the markets is very essential, as it brings them to a more sustainable and economic development way for them to be independent and self-sufficient. And your model of work includes 3 steps: community mobilization, training, and connection to markets. You touched upon training as well as the connection to markets, but could you please tell us some examples of community mobilization that you have done in areas that you work in one of the 21 countries?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, community mobilization is key to the work that we do, right? Because I mean, ultimately, if you are trying to, kind of provide training or other support on a one-to-one basis, there's a real limit to how many people you can reach. And ultimately, as you said at the beginning, that hunger and poverty are big global issues. And to be able to actually tackle those, we need solutions that work at scale, right? And so, ultimately, many of the places that we work around the world are areas that are emerging from some form of, or in recent years have some issues, linked to some form of conflict. So I'll give you an example. So in Nepal, we've got a widespread program across much of the country, and we work with communities, particularly in the highlands and the kind of midland areas of the country. And there are areas that were significantly affected during the Civil War. Now, what you find often is when you go to a community and you start work and you're invited in to start work, that's often by kind of the local government or the national government or by stakeholders within the community. What you'll often find is that people just sometimes even from house to house, they don't really know each other because, particularly with conflict, there's a lot of displacement. And so people, end up in villages around the country that are often not where they were born and where their family were. And, things have moved significantly. And sometimes, they find that their neighbors are people that were on the opposite sides of them during something like the Civil War in Nepal. So, a big part of what we do is kind of a convening role of bringing people together and going through a process that's all based around a series of core values of really learning about each other, about the problems that people are facing, but ultimately mapping out what communities see for themselves as the solution to the problem that they're facing. And I think that's really important because, I think, kind of the old image of and the stereotype of communities living in poverty are often people that are sat down doing nothing. And the reality is that, the communities that we work with are already doing an awful lot, and they often actually know what's needed in order to be able to change their situation, but they need some support at different steps in the process in order to be able to achieve that, right? So the community mobilization piece is really core to what we do. So typically we encourage the communities that we work with to form what we call self-help groups, usually made of up to well, between 20 and 25 people. Largely in many areas, the majority of those groups are women. And then those groups are the basis through which we can provide training, but also inputs as they start to build their agricultural businesses or food production businesses. And that's, I think, really important, because the group becomes a basis, and there's kind of a mutual support mechanism that's there. But they also often run, in terms of building financial awareness and financial management skills, they'll run a savings and loan scheme. So everyone within the group will commit to saving a certain amount of money every week or every month, and then they'll use that money to target investing in different farmers' businesses within the group. And what that means is that the businesses start to expand to the point where they can join cooperatives and work at a much bigger scale, if that makes sense. So it's all about not only the inputs that enable people to start to build their businesses. It starts with identifying what the problem is and what they perceive to be the solution. Because I think what's really important to keep in mind is that an outsider's view of what the solution to the problem is will often ignore a whole number of different factors, right? So it's really important that there's local ownership and local direction to the projects that we're running, bringing people together in a way where there's kind of like a support mechanism within communities. And I'll give you one example. I mean, there's some communities that we work with in Zambia that I just before COVID I was visiting. And they're in the copper belt area of Zambia, which is an area that is quite dry and kind of often characterized by kind of big clouds of orange dust. And they've successfully set up the first women run cooperative in Zambia, and are now supplying one of the continent's biggest dairies. So kind of that whole kind of infrastructure is really important in terms of kind of providing those farming inputs, whether that's livestock or seeds or whatever else is needed, equipment maybe, and then the training, and then the broader access to market. And then the other piece that I would just want to touch on in terms of the scale of the impact of the work that we do, a core part of the values of the organization, and it dates back to a very beginning, when our organization was started in 1944 by a gentleman from the US who had gone to Europe as a humanitarian worker during the Spanish Civil War, and had said they were going from town to town or village to village every day feeding people. And he was saying he was a farmer himself, and he said, well, this is crazy, because I feed you today, but like in a few hours you're going to be hungry again. What if you had a cow and you'd have a reliable source of a high nutrient milk? So a big part of our approach is that if you're part of our project and you receive 2 calves, you commit as part of receiving that the first calves from those animals that you'll pass on to another family in need. So what happens is that there's significant wealth transfer within the communities, and people are really invested because the livestock that they're receiving is often the most valuable asset that they have. And so there's a huge incentive to learn all of the training and kind of look at how they look after the animals, etc. But then there's also this kind of peer support mechanism that gets bigger and bigger. And that cooperative that I mentioned to you in Zambia that I was visited a few years back, I met one of the ladies that founded the cooperative, and she was saying that on her farm alone they'd traced back up to 10 pass-ons of the original cows that were given. So if you think about that kind of the core, you start with a project and you provide certain support, but then that just gets bigger and bigger. And that is something that's how you start to tackle some of these big global issues that we're talking about here.
Mhm. What I really like about your community mobilization approach is that you don't come and say this is the solution, the one-way solution, but rather you work with the community members, local leaders to find a solution that is sustainable, that is approachable for the key issues that they are facing. And with your help in terms of support, in terms of resources, you are able to build a system, a mechanism system that allows them to bring build agricultural and farming systems around that can be sustainable, as mentioned. And in terms of example that you mentioned in a cow that can be traced back to 10 generations, that's a great example of how that community mobilization works, and the results of it are going years and decades ahead. So that's wonderful to see. You mentioned that in the communities that you work in, the majority of leaders, members are women, and women empowerment and social capital is one of your focus areas. Could you please tell us why investing in women is key to ending hunger and poverty?
Well, I'd actually go a little bit further than that, and I would say that investing in women is the key to tackling global hunger and poverty, and I'll tell you why. So, talked a little bit already today about the importance of agriculture as within a lot of countries' economies, but also as a source of employment and source of livelihood. Um, you know, the reality is, as I said, that smallholder farmers around the world produce the majority of the world's food, and the majority of the work that is done on smallholder farms is done by women. So and the reality is that in many parts of the world where we work, that women do not have the same access to rights and resources that they do in countries, and in other countries, and that's a huge barrier to actually developing successful businesses. So that, I mean, that in short, that's really why we focus our work on women, and I mean, there's obviously kind of wider wider reasoning as well. I mean, just to give you one example, if you're talking about food security and nutrition, there is a lot of evidence that shows that when you invest your support in supporting women, that the whole family benefits, particularly children, and so that's a big part of why we focus our work in that way. But I also really want to touch on that access to resources issue, because in many countries around the world, women are not allowed to own land, or if the law says that they can own land, there are social norms that mean that they often aren't able to own or control the land that they own. Inheritance is also another big issue. Often land will go to male family members and not to women, so that's a big problem. So that just adds up to a whole number of reasons why our programs focus predominantly on women.
Yes, indeed. In many countries, there is still a lack of access to resources for women, and women supporting and empowering women in investing in them, as described by you with the evidence provided, is indeed the key to ending hunger and poverty across the world. If someone would like to support Heifer International, how can they do so?
I think the easiest way is to go to our website. So that's heifer.org, heifer.org. There's a lot of information about the work that we do and how you can get involved and how you can support the work that we do.
Wonderful. The link to the Heifer International's website will be provided in the description, so you viewing and listening can go to the website and familiarize yourself with the wonderful work Chris and the team at Heifer International is doing. Thank you so much, Chris. It was wonderful to get to know you, and very meaningful work that your organization is doing.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
For you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, please press like and share button, because this will show the YouTube and podcast algorithms that this conversation is important, that we need to support organizations that are helping to end hunger and poverty across the world. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.